Hey guys, welcome to Conservatism in Context. As you may know, the Republican National Convention kicked off last night in Cleveland, Ohio. Donald Trump, since May 3rd, has been the presumptive nominee, meaning he is expected to become the official nominee this week at the end of the convention. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, has been the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party since approximately June the 6th, give or take. And of course, she's going to be nominated at the Philadelphia convention the week after this Ohio convention. Before we can talk about the Republican National Convention, we have to get a better understanding of the conservative movement of the past decade and the Republican race to the White House, starting with McCain, then Romney, and of course, the Trump nomination. Along the way, I'll also be talking about Ron Paul and the growth of the Tea Party / Libertarian movement. And with that being said, let's go. Let's start with 2008. Now, at this point in time, George W. Bush is making his way out of the Oval Office. He's leaving behind him the financial collapse. He's leaving behind, the Iraq War, a bunch of different crises that the next president has to tackle. At the time, the media says he's probably one of the worst, if not the worst, president up to that point. And actually, few would disagree with the mainstream media in that regard. But anyway, John McCain, this senator from Arizona, steps up to the plate. He's a POW. He's noticeably aged. And he's this kind of white guy, neocon guy, meaning that he aligns more with George W. Bush, Bill Kristol. But the bottom line here is that McCain is this, bland old white guy running against Barack Obama in a time where identity politics is the name of the game. The Democratic Party has figured that out completely. They used to nominate people like Dukakis and Bill Clinton, but now they figured it out that if they nominate a woman or a minority, they're going to end up getting more minorities and women out for their party, and they're also going to try to race bait some, just white males into voting for that candidate as well. And so far, with, the age of Obama, that has completely worked for them. Of course, McCain ends up failing, but this is also important because Ron Paul ends up, he tries to beat out McCain for the nomination. He doesn't successfully do so, but he starts this grassroots movement, this Tea Party libertarian movement of zero government intervention in the Middle East and foreign policy and things like that. He takes an anti-interventionist stance on that. Zero intervention in free markets. He defers to the states. He's an advocate of federalism. He basically wants to have the federal government have as little power as possible. He wants to make them, as small as a dime. But yeah, it's really interesting because Ron Paul ends up bringing out this movement that previously wasn't there, and it almost demonstrates or displays some of the same characteristics of, Gary Johnson and the Libertarian Party. So that's important. And when Romney rolls around in 2012, what do Republicans do once again? They look at a rich white guy, unfortunately, in an age of identity politics. And it's no wonder Romney ends up losing. And again, Ron Paul ends up losing the nomination, but it's important once again because he gets his movement going, and it's growing. And in fact, at the 2012 convention, they had to invoke a new rule to cheat Ron Paul out of contesting that convention, essentially. And so now we have gone through two failed Republican candidates that are neocon, rich white guys. Meanwhile, we have trashed perfectly good candidate such as Ron Paul, who stands for liberty, prosperous markets, anti-interventionism. He stands on a very stable platform, one that the conservative movement should be proud of, but instead ignores him completely. June 2015 finally rolls around, and the Republican Party is looking for someone new, somebody that's going to win. They're trying to mix it up. And so Donald Trump announces his candidacy in June 2015 as the outsider candidate, the man that has zero political experience, and thus he is not corrupted by the political system in Washington. Now, of course, there have been other political outsiders in the past, such as Jimmy Carter, which have done absolutely nothing, and they end up being complete flops. But let's give Donald Trump a chance. Okay, well, he's also a tough guy, so he's not afraid to go out on a limb and say things that are sometimes viewed as politically dangerous. He's not afraid to call out anything that's politically correct. Also, it's important to note that he funds his own campaign, and I looked it up. It's actually like 2/3. The other third is just private donations. But for the most part, he funds his entire campaign, which again is different from traditional political candidates. By the first debate, which is in August of 2015, Trump is already sitting at the top of the polls, beating out career politicians like Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio for that top spot. Again, this is the outsider candidate. Republicans are looking for somebody new, and so it's no wonder that Donald Trump sits at the top of the polls. Now, to really understand how this political primary process works for the Republicans is the lane explanation. In the Republican Party, there's really two lanes, the conservative lane and the moderate lane. Now, the conservative lane, you have people like Ted Cruz, Ronald Reagan, just to name a few. But these are the people that are more right than in the middle. They run on limited government, free market. But again, they're more hard right than middle right, and they're more principled than probably any of the other people running. Now, your moderates are going to be sort of like your neoconservatives. They appeal more to the middle than they do to the party base. They are willing to compromise. They are more likely to win a general election because they can reach out to Democrats. And so these are going to be your people like, George Bush, Jeb Bush, John McCain, Marco Rubio, they're Chris Christie, John Kasich. That is typically your moderate lane. Now, Trump, it's interesting. Trump, in my opinion, is not a real conservative, or at least hasn't proven himself to be a real conservative yet. During this first debate in August, he actually advocates a single-payer healthcare system, which is essentially what Bernie Sanders wanted to do. It's more socialistic. It's less free market. It's essentially all the government doing all the work for the healthcare industry. It's also interesting to note that Donald Trump's family members before the New York primaries, which I think were in April, his family was still registered Democrats, so they couldn't even vote for him in the Republican primary. And so Donald Trump has never really demonstrated that he's a true conservative. He's principled. In fact, he's kind of run on an opposite campaign. He said he's the deal maker. He's ready to go in and compromise, and that's probably not something that a lot of true conservatives are looking for. But nonetheless, Donald Trump takes this conservative lane of the Republican Party and hijacks it. Again, the conservative base or the Republican Party is typically more hard right. And so when they saw this guy, this tough guy outsider candidate, they were sold immediately. Fast forward to February 1st, 2016. It's the Iowa caucus. It's the first caucus out of a series of caucuses and primaries that will take place during the up to the convention. Generally, the person that wins this is going to be the nominee, but again, that's not always the case. So on this particular caucus, Ted Cruz wins. Donald Trump, I believe, takes second. And everybody is looking for this Donald Trump sort of versus Marco Rubio versus Ted Cruz sort of deal. And it like at that moment, it seemed that Donald Trump and Ted Cruz were actually sharing the conservative lane that we talked about earlier. But by New Hampshire, by the time that rolls around, and then by the time South Carolina rolls around, it's clear that Donald Trump definitely was picking up some momentum. And he started to pick up more and more of that conservative lane. In fact, I found an article from the Huffington Post that actually said that Cruz became considered an establishment candidate at that time. And I can put the link of that article in the description below. Now, as the electoral season went on, more and more people started dropping out. Of course, among the more notable ones was Jeb Bush after the South Carolina primary. He had exhausted tons of resources, tons of money to try to get in at least the top 3 of any one primary, and he failed to do so. Then there was March, when Marco Rubio dropped out after losing his home state of Florida. In fact, the only county/district he won was his own. So that was another bitter disappointment for the establishment. And so by the time Wisconsin, New York, Indiana, that kind of rolls around, you're left with John Kasich, Ted Cruz, and Donald Trump. Now, of course, John Kasich, it's pretty obvious he's the moderate candidate. He used to be I think he was the chair of the Budget Committee in the U.S. Congress in the 1990s. You're left with, Ted Cruz, the Texas senator. I wouldn't say Reagan candidate because he's not that popular, but he's certainly one of the most principled conservatives. And then Donald Trump, of course, taking that conservative lane also as the outsider tough guy. And the Indiana primary rolls around, and of course Donald Trump wins, Ted Cruz drops out, and then I think the next day John Kasich drops out as well. This, of course, makes Donald Trump the presumptive nominee at this point, and all that's left to do is finish out the primary season and then wait till the convention. What makes this Republican primary season so interesting is that Donald Trump has basically done the impossible. He has had no political experience Yet he comes into this primary season already in August in first place. So maybe perhaps the rise of celebrities in politics, or at least this is the sign of the outsider, the Jimmy Carters that are coming back, that have no political experience, that are expected to run because they have not been corrupted by political battle in Washington. It also helps, again, that Donald Trump funds, most of his campaign, because it says something about who he serves. He doesn't serve a special interest group, or like the Koch brothers or whoever. He serves himself, his own principles, and he serves the principles of his followers, his fans, his supporters. Also, something to note, again, is he has been the tough guy, the cultural warrior of some sort. I plan on putting some links in the description below about political correctness and just what it looks like if you haven't seen it. But it's interesting because Donald Trump, unlike anybody else in this race, has noted something in American culture that has seemingly gone unnoticed because it's never been mentioned in the mainstream media. So he has put this enormous spotlight, if you will, on something that's rarely noted, and he has ran with it. He has took on political correctness. His goal is to reshape American culture, to get the regressive left out of American politics, to get all the political correctness and the white guilt and all these and identity politics. Donald Trump is aiming to get all of this nonsense out of politics, and his goal is to reshape American culture in the process. Also, something to note: while Donald Trump, most of the time he is, right on with the Republican platform, a lot of Republican ideas, that doesn't necessarily make him a real conservative. Like I said, Ron Paul is probably the purest conservative to run in the past decade. He's, like I said earlier, he is the guy for free markets. He is the guy for zero government intervention in the market and also in foreign politics. So, i.e. Middle East. He's the anti-interventionist when it comes to foreign policy. And Donald Trump hasn't really shown that. He differs on those things. He wants NATO to step up. He wants, ISIS taken out. He wants to, quote, bomb the hell out of them. So, in a sense, Donald isn't really a true conservative. Yet, again, what's interesting is he doesn't really have to be, as he clearly took over that conservative lane, and the far right lane of the party hijacked it all the way to victory. So hopefully now you're all caught up. Now you understand what's been going on for the past decade in the Republican Party, and you can sit back and enjoy the fireworks of the Republican National Convention.